Hello everybody, my name is Rachel. Welcome to my channel, Kalanati. Today I want to talk about The Angel of the Crows by Katherine Addison. This is basically a standalone historical fantasy novel, though I will talk more about the genre in a second. I picked this up purely because I had read and loved The Goblin Emperor by Addison a number of years ago. That book is definitely beloved, and I know many people have been keeping an eye out for another book by Katherine Addison because they thought it would be the sequel. The Angel of the Crows is not the sequel to The Goblin Emperor. It's completely unrelated, but just side note, A Witness for the Dead is the kind of companion novel to The Goblin Emperor. It's coming out later this year. So, back to The Angel of the Crows. This is essentially Sherlock Holmes fan fiction, and I'm not making this up. There is an author's note at the end that says that The Angel of the Crows began life as Sherlock wingfic, and wingfic is like a subgenre of fan fiction where a character has wings. I think it's important to talk about this because the marketing of this book completely does not mention the Sherlock connection. It really connects this book more with like gaslamp fantasy, Victorian England, angels, and Jack the Ripper. And that's also true, but I think a lot of people will be able to judge their interest in this book better, whether they actually want to read it or not, based on it being Sherlock fan fiction. If you are not particularly interested in Sherlock canon, this book probably isn't for you. And if you have, a varying interest level in the endless series of Sherlock retellings and adaptations that have come out recently, you may or may not want to read it. I fall somewhere in the middle. In this book, the Sherlock character is an angel named Crow who calls himself the Angel of London. The Watson character is Dr. Doyle, recently returned from the war in Afghanistan after being horribly injured by a fallen angel. Crow and Doyle meet as usual in the beginning story, A Study in Scarlet. They decide to live together and to consult on cases together. The story is structured as a series of very straightforward but compulsively readable retellings of famous Sherlock stories, including A Study in Scarlet, Sign of the Four, and The Hound of the Baskervilles. Woven into those reimagined cases is this more original plot of Crow and Doyle investigating the Jack the Ripper murders as well as the Thames Torso murders. And this world is supernatural. It is populated by all manner of creatures and beings. There are angels in various states, pretty much on every street corner. In fact, the Baker Street Irregulars are the nameless angels of London, which I thought was a really cool touch. And there are also a lot of other creatures here, including vampires, hemophages, hellhounds, and probably other things that I'm forgetting at the moment. And that is pretty much everything you need to know about the setup of this book. It's Sherlock with angels. I am of two minds about this book. On the one hand, I liked it, I enjoyed it, it was fun and entertaining, and I couldn't put it down. And on the other hand, I think it has at least one obvious weakness that keeps it from like taking off and becoming its own thing and being like long-lasting and memorable. So I'm going to structure the rest of this as a series of pros and cons, and I'm going to start with the cons because that is simply the shorter list. My biggest con for this book is pretty simple. The plots of the Sherlock cases are not really retold or reimagined that much. Addison doesn't go very far at all in changing up the mysteries. The outcomes and solutions and stuff are pretty much exactly what I remember from reading the original stories or what other adaptations have done. This means that if you are familiar with the Sherlock canon, this book is incredibly predictable. You know exactly what's going to happen next. Conversely, if you haven't read the original Sherlock stories, this book will spoil 5 of the most famous cases for you. Now, because of the pros, which I'll talk about in a second, this didn't bother me very much until I got to the Hound of the Baskervilles retelling, and that's because I'm pretty familiar with that one. It was my favorite Sherlock story for a long time. I read the book multiple times when I was a kid, and I was actively bored by that section of The Angel of the Crows. I literally skim read like one or two of the letters that Doyle writes to Crow because I knew exactly what they were saying. I was like, why am I reading this? I just want to get to the fun part where, you know, our characters are in the same place and talking to each other again. So that's my biggest complaint about that is the outcomes and solutions of the cases are barely touched at all. And I think that Addison was much more focused on inserting supernatural causes and characters into the existing roles in the story rather than really changing up the plots. My only other con that I really want to mention here is kind of like a content warning, as well as just explaining my personal taste. And that is the Jack the Ripper murders and the Thames Torso murders. These cases lead to the most graphic descriptions of murders and mutilated and cut up bodies and such. And that quickly hit my upper limit of like horrific crime scene descriptions. I am very turned off by that kind of description, and it kind of nauseates me. So even though this part of the book was the only really original storyline, I wasn't very invested in it because I found a lot of it kind of too gruesome for my liking. And I would say that if you also do not really have the stomach or the inclination to read the graphic descriptions of women's bodies being horribly cut open, then don't read the book. Like seriously, it got to me a little bit. Now for the pros, of which I have many more. Most of these are focused on the characters and the world building. The first one is that Crow is a likable Sherlock Holmes with wings. So he's genuinely likable, and I felt quite sympathetic towards him. I always wanted to know more about him. At the same time, I think that despite him being quite the opposite of the iconic Sherlock personality, the fact that he is an angel and he has this inhuman nature actually fits into the Sherlock mold. Next, there's Dr. Doyle as the Watson character. I maybe find Watson a little bit boring, but in this case, there's a bit of a twist basically involving Doyle's emerging supernatural nature, which I'm not going to talk about in detail because the details would be spoilers, but this led to an interesting twist on his character and also blended in well with adding supernatural elements to some of the cases, and I really appreciated that. There are also a lot of other twists and interpretations and almost like inversions of the iconic personalities in the Sherlock canon, and this really kept me reading. I just wanted to get to the next scene where maybe another character would be introduced. I wanted to know, like, what is the Lestrade character going to be like? Will Mrs. Hudson show up? Things like that. The Moriarty character, or possibly multiple characters, was really interesting, and I loved what Addison did with that element. I want to know more about that. Perhaps the most surprising element of this book that I really enjoyed, though, was the angelic world building. And this is actually something that's really turned me off in other books. I'm thinking mostly of Aliette de Bodard's series about like fallen angels in Paris. I've tried to read that series and I actually hated like the angels and stuff in that book. So I had some reservations when I picked up The Angel of the Crows and realized that, yeah, there are going to be a lot of angels in this. And it just was pulled off so well. I think that there's this really smart thing that Addison does where not only is she trying to explain the nature of angels and how they go from being like nameless to having habitations and names, and then how they can become fallen, and explaining all of that while also explaining the character of Crow, who is a very unusual angel. And I cared about him quite a bit, and therefore I ended up paying a lot more attention to the rest of the angels in the story, and they were just used in, I think, a really smart way. Genuinely, it surprised me so much that I liked this aspect of the world building. I don't think that adding supernatural elements or taking the Sherlock stories and putting them in a supernatural world is that original. I know it's been done before, but adding in the angels definitely made it something different. And lastly, to cap it off, I think this book definitely has good writing and compelling storytelling. I may be nitpicky about what Addison did or did not do with plot structure and stuff here, but I cannot deny that she definitely knows how to write characters and action that really pull the reader in and that I at least became quite invested in. My verdict, if I really have one on this book, is that it's well-written Sherlock fan fiction, and it's not amazingly original, but it's good for what it attempts to be, I suppose. And if you're looking for a couple evenings of just good, solid entertainment, this fits the bill. Those are pretty much it for my thoughts on this book, so if you have read The Angel of the Crows by Katherine Addison, definitely let me know what you thought of it. Leave me a comment down below. Thank you so much for watching, and I will talk to you again soon, and until then, bye.